this is living our values by sharing our space. As you know, that our building is often empty for a majority of the week. Even in pre-pandemic times, we didn't have a lot going on during the week. So last summer, we were approached by RASA, the Rochester Arts and Science Academy, about leasing our space. And we weren't the only ones they approached. They had some different options, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about RASA. Those of you who know what's going on had probably seen RASA down below at the Congregational Church down the hill. The Rochester Arts and Science Academy is an international baccalaureate pre-K through 5th grade private school. In fact, we've had UU kids attend there in the past, and we have UU grandkids there now. So RASA has been growing and expanding to 2 sections each of pre-K, kindergarten, and 1st grades. So next year they'll need to presumably add another section of 2nd grade, and they have completely maxed out of all space at their current location. They would like to lease our space specifically for their 4th, 5th, and an expansion to 6th grade. So why our church? As I said, they've been looking at other opportunities, but our space is the best option for them, as they say, their opinion, not ours. And it's all because of location. So they have a lot of families who have more than one child attending their school, and easier transportation, as well as staff that is shared between the levels, and just, you know, if they had to go back for an assembly or whatever with the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, they could absolutely just walk down the hill. Just a little bit of background. They do not operate on Rochester Public Schools calendar. They start the week before Labor Day and go until the 3rd week of June, and they have 5 semesters. I don't know what you want to call that, 5 terms. There we go, there's the word. And so there are some weeks off and on in there that they don't have school. So school is 8 a.m. to 3:25 p.m. and they offer extended hours. This would be one of the situations where it would be good for them to have a space so close, because they do offer extended hours until 6 p.m. And so they wouldn't necessarily need to be in our building. Okay. This isn't working for me. I need my screen, my camera on. I like to look too much. So, all right. So that just gives you a little bit of info about what their day looks like. So what would this mean for us at our building? So they'd have the use of the 7 rooms in the religious education wing. There's 3 on the main level and 4 upstairs that they would be able to use. They would use the commons for lunch. They would not need to use the kitchen, aside from maybe serving, because the majority of their students bring lunch, or they cater in lunch for the ones who don't. And for physical education, if there's inclement weather. But if you've ever driven by the church at the bottom of the hill, they're outside a lot, 2 or 3 times a day. There's kids out there when you drive by. So as far as what would be off limits, the offices, so, you know, the main offices, the 3 offices, my office, the music office, and the Peabody room, and the nursery. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Peabody room is conference room. So everything that would be off limits has doors that can close to be off limits. And the sanctuary would be available only if reserved in advance. So we would have to have prior notice. So it wouldn't impact, like, if Austin were to come and practice during the day, or if we needed to set something up for an upcoming Sunday, it wouldn't affect that. Their current lease of what they pay down at the Congregational Church, and which we've been reviewing, is roughly $1,000 per student per year. So if we decide to move forward, we would negotiate a flat rate roughly based on that. So I think they have 100, what was it, 150 students down there. So their lease is about $150,000. I mean, within that realm, it kind of gives us a starting point. So depending on how many students they had here, it would be anywhere from like 30,000 to 45,000, depending on if 30 kids, 45 kids, anywhere in between. It's just a starting point to kind of start that negotiation. They will provide any furnishings required, although we have a plethora of little chairs that I said they could probably use because we have more kid chairs than we could possibly use. And they would actually be installing smart boards in some of the rooms that we would be able to limit, or we would be able to use depending on who it was. It wouldn't be just for anybody, but definitely some staff could use those if need be. And RASA would pay for cleaning the leased space daily. They have a contract with a cleaning company already that comes to the church down the hill 5 days a week. And so when they're in session, and so they would most likely just contract with that same person. And I should say an asterisk. I know I'm flying through this. This presentation will also be available when the video is available. So, utilities, Connie has started taking or making a spreadsheet of our usage, not our payment, because as we all know, energy prices can fluctuate greatly. So it's really those kilowatt hours and et cetera, that would change. However, based on our cost, because that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it, we know our usage isn't going to double because there are just certain things that happen in the building all the time. But even if the cost were to double, we would still come out, I'm going to say, ahead in the fact that we would definitely not lose money on the situation. They would provide their own Wi-Fi and voice over internet phone. So, and like I said in here, we're not in this to make money. This is part of living our mission to, have a environmentally not empty building all the time. But we also won't lose money, and we should see a profit. Cost of any safety updates will be covered by RASA or negotiated in the lease. It just kind of depends on what it is, how much it is, etc. But that's not our job to figure out. That's RASA's job to figure out, because they're the ones who want to have our space. They're the ones running the school. So they're working with a safety consultant and the fire marshal to meet necessary requirements. And huge asterisks here, we don't need to put in a sprinkler system because we're covered by that just because of our, what's the new term? I know grandfathered isn't the term you should use anymore, but that's the term I'm going to use. There's a new one though that you should use. How would it impact church activities? So even in pre-pandemic times, there was very limited use of the building during the quote unquote school day. And there will be space for daytime meetings. Part of the reason why we are keeping the Peabody room and the sanctuary kind of off limits is because those would both be places that we would be able to have meetings during the day. Depending on the time, the hearth room would be available, even the commons, depending on the time of day and the weather outside and everything like that. In the event of a memorial service, RASA can make alternative plans. They've had to deal with that at the Congregational Church down the hill. So it's not something they are completely unfamiliar with. Oh, I want to say one more thing about the impact on church activities. So one of the things is that, they have the extended care until 6. They know that we need the building on Wednesday evenings. I said, preferably to have the building cleared by 4 at the latest on Wednesdays. I mean, possibly 4:30, depending on, who it is and what it is. But that would be an example of a day where if they did have extended care options here. On Wednesdays, the kids would go down to the other location. So the next steps, none of this is finalized by any means. We still have a ways to go. The board will review the updated information at their next meeting next Wednesday, the 15th. And if they vote to lease our space to RASA, we're still not there yet, because we have a lease that we need to negotiate. And we will use their current lease as a starting point and kind of go from there and negotiate it until it's to both of our likings. And at any point we can say, no, this isn't going to work for us because, you know, X, Y, or Z. I think that's my last slide.
Amy?
Yes.
Can I add that?
Absolutely.
In conversations with RASA, what we're looking at is a 1-year lease right now. And so that anytime within that first year, if either party is feeling like this is just not working out the way we had expected, or we don't want to renew the lease, then so we do have this 1 year would be our first lease. And then at that point, we can decide to continue the lease, terminate the lease, or renegotiate the lease. Either party could.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a long-term commitment at this time unless it is working well for us.
So a couple things before, I noticed there's one chat there, but a couple things before we go to questions or anything like that is, yeah, they aren't going to buy the building. That's kind of a lot of people's first, you know, as they hear, oh, well, maybe they'll buy the building. They are already too big. I mean, honestly, and if they continue growing, then they're going to not, I mean, this is what the word that Kim used, stopgap, which is my new favorite word. We're a stopgap until they kind of figure out what they'll be doing, because presumably the next year they'll add a 3rd grade, and the next year they'll add a 4th grade and a 7th grade. And yeah, they already are maxed out. Yeah, there's no way. So, and then one more thing I want to lift up, and Kim and I have talked a lot about this, both being, Kim is currently in a classroom, and me being a former teacher. It is not our job to figure out how they are going to do this. By no means. If we move forward with this, it is our job to work with them to make sure that, you know, we're mutually in agreement about things, and that we have the space for them, but we don't need to figure out how they're going to arrange their classrooms or where they're going to put their coats or anything like that. That's not our job, although we have gone down that rabbit hole at times. So, all right. Questions? I guess I don't have my chat open, but.
So I sent a question there to Kim as the board person on this about negotiating the lease, how that would work. And then there's another question that RASA would use, it's presumed RASA would use a front entry. Is that a bottleneck for staff or other groups using the church? So thinking about space flow during the week. So one, how will the lease be negotiated by whom? And then space flow during the week of where they'd enter, exit, Amy and Kim.
I'll take the lease negotiating, and then Amy, you can take the entrance question. Right. I would imagine that we would go to the board with the results of the forum, the input that we get here, some preliminary things that we've been talking with RASA with negotiations, and that the board would approve that we move forward with negotiations. I think it's important that Amy be on that negotiating as the staff member who would be most impacted. And of course, as the church president, I've been part of this conversation being in education. So maybe there's another staff member that wants to be part of that, that we would have a small team that would negotiate back and forth with RASA. When that team, if we get to the point where that team comes to an agreement in a lease, then that negotiated proposal would be taken to the board for final approval before we would formally sign a lease with RASA. Do you want to talk a little bit about the entrance?
Yes, so the entrance, that's part of the negotiations. Presumably they would have their own, like a Ring doorbell or whatever that would be a RASA one, so it would go to them and it wouldn't necessarily impact our office. As far as, being able to see who's at the door. There's been some talk of them using the door by my office right here that leads out to the courtyard. So that's all part of that negotiation. As far as having a bottleneck, I mean, if they're starting to get here, between like 7:30 and then classes start at 8, I mean, Erica is probably the only one who's actually here even remotely close to 8 a.m. And then if they're leaving at 3:30, Erica is usually leaving by that time, if not sooner. And then Luke and I are usually out of the building too, because we have kids that need to get picked up from school as well. So I don't think that would be an issue as far as that goes.
And they have been incredibly flexible. And I think that if we didn't see something and in action, it turned out to be a little bit of an issue, I feel fairly confident that they would be more than happy to sort that out with us.
Mm-hmm.
I see Kathy has a question. Would we have just third graders next year, or are they expanding to 3rd through 6th? Actually, they're looking at having a 4th and a 5th grade class at our building, and hopefully a 6th grade class. They're wanting to expand into middle school. So the younger kids would stay down at the Congregational Church, and then we would have the 4th, 5th, and the more the intermediate age kids.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as that goes, so like talking about them being flexible, down at the Congregational Church, they have a few like exclusive spaces, like their principal has an office and some teachers have offices, and they have a library that are all like off limits for the church. We won't have any of those. We won't have any of those exclusive spaces here. They will all be shared spaces, and we will be able to, have religious education classes just like normal, except maybe we'll have tables and chairs in the room instead, or something like that. One of the questions that came through was, are the outdoor spaces included? And that would be yes. There was even talk of them possibly replacing the play set, and then that might be something where that would be an example of possibly a shared expense, because we could use it and they couldn't. But also, this is something where it's just like when we've been touring and walking around, it's just been conversation. This isn't even anything that's for sure. And so yeah, I would include the outdoor spaces, and I would imagine that they would really, when they do small groups, if the weather's nice, I would imagine they'd want to be outside as much as possible. Who would be responsible for meeting folks? It would be, so they would have their own doorbell, and then we would have a doorbell. And I'm sure that would be something we would need to figure out, because right now we have our own little camera, and they would have their own little camera. But that would be something that we'd need to.
Their staff would be responsible for admitting those kids.
Yes.
We would not have any part of that. Anne asked, have you spoken with the Congregational Church, and how do they feel the lease relationship has worked?
We have not. Mostly because they've been there for 5 years, and they just renegotiated another 3-year lease, I think. So my expectation is that things are going fine. But that's definitely something we can totally check with, should everything be moving to that next step. We've been trying to really balance like what information we've been trying to gather. We don't want to get the cart before the horse too far here, as far as all that goes.
And Amy and I are trying really, really hard not to figure out everything for them, as far as, okay, where are the coat hooks going to go? How many chairs do they need in this room? What is this going to be?
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting thing, because it's like, how would that work? Or whatever. But yeah, so the rooms that they would be using would be, if you've ever been on the first floor, we have the boring rooms that are down by my office, room 101, room 102, and room 103, which I'm dying to give real names to, but that'll come sometime. And then upstairs, they would have access to the Murray room, which is typically the youth room with the couches, the Clara Barton room, the Thoreau room, and the chapel. And one of our big points would be that we would want the chapel to remain a space that could be used for like smaller church gatherings and things like that. So it wouldn't necessarily become like a full-on classroom. But it would definitely be something that's part of the negotiation, is that that needs to be probably the most flexible space.
Jerry's got a question, I think. He has his virtual hand up there.
The students at RASA have lockers in the hallways, not just coat hooks. And our hallways are relatively narrow, so something's going to have to be figured out for that.
Yeah, and so one of the things we've talked about, one of the things we've talked about is the possibility of them either using our coat room or using one of, like, putting cubbies in one of the rooms down here. So, I mean, there's been putting hooks in the hallway, so there's definitely been talk of different ways to do that. But yeah, it's definitely not our job. And they've toured our space a couple times. There've been teachers who've come through. Kim and I went down and toured their space just to kind of get an idea of what that looks like. Knowing that it's not going to look like the pre-K classrooms down there with a zillion things all over the walls, since it is the older kids. So have we told them that room 103 is freezing cold? Room 103 is not quite as bad as it used to be, and we now have thermal shades on the windows. So as long as they're closed, they're fine. But they are well aware of the limitations of our building and the fact that we don't have air conditioning. So they're aware of that.
They don't have air conditioning at the Congo either. They were tenants at Christ United Methodist before they were at the Congregational Church, and they outgrew that space, which is why, one of the reasons why they moved down the hill. I did want to mention two other things. One is that they did not have to close school at all during the pandemic, because of all of the precautions that they mandated and that the children observed. I mean, it wasn't a question of, kids not wearing their masks and stuff like that. They really were conscientious about all of that. And so they lost no school time at all. And the children are really taught to be stewards of their space, which I think, we can, snicker about what that might mean, but I mean, kids pick up paper towels by the can, and if something spills, they clean it up. So it's not as if they're unmindful about the spaces that they use. So those are two things I wanted to be sure got mentioned. And they've always rented spaces from churches, and that has been their space. So they have I think a really functional understanding of what that partnership is like.
So I have to head out, but I'm going to answer the two questions quick. And one is, they cap their classrooms at 15. So that's
They're very small.
very small. And then for groups meeting upstairs in the evening, I think they have 10 classrooms, specific classrooms over down at the Congregational Church, and only one of them has desks. So all of the seating and tables and everything is very flexible. So when you're thinking of the Buddhist groups, I mean, that would be another reason why we would be keeping the chapel as flexible as possible. And they may have to meet in a different room. I mean, that might just be the thing. So along with them being flexible, we will need to be flexible, but understanding that this is our space first, but that they are sharing our space and there may be compromises that need to be made. So I am going to log off so I can go start my room or my class. We're talking gender identity and expression tonight, so wish us all luck.
Have
Thank
fun.
you, Amy.
Thanks.
Are there other questions that we can try and answer or else take forward to get answered?
Can we make just one or two other comments? We have our grandsons at Rasa.
Absolutely.
Two things about Rasa. It's a fairly diverse community, except for socioeconomic status. It is a private school. There are a lot of physicians and 2 physician families that are there. But in terms of ethnicity, it's a fairly diverse group. They do scholarship some students, so it opens it up a little bit in terms of socioeconomics. And the other thing is, you know, Elizabeth talked about they have some respect for their space. The students are taught to behave in a responsible way, but in addition, we have been very impressed with how the kids behave toward each other. Almost all the students know all the students, and we have seen a lot of examples of students helping other students out, you know, older kids helping younger kids out. And I think their way of being in the world is pretty consistent with our approach to how we want people to act in the world. So I think that is a good fit for us also.
Are there any other questions? I can't see all the questions, Luke. So if you have any that pop up.
I don't think we're missing any in the chat right now. And of course, Amy is much more able to answer some of the logistical things through this from a staff perspective, but obviously I and Erica have been in some of these just among the staff conversations as well about how this is going to work and how we'll need to adjust and figuring it out and being flexible too. But I'm glad to answer anything from a staff use perspective as well.
I just want to say I'm really appreciative of this opportunity that's come our way. I know when we were in conversation as a congregation about our building and what we wanted from a building and what we would have ideally in a building, there was a lot of discussion about the importance of a building that doesn't sit empty all week long and only gets used a day or two a week, that you know, having a space that the community can also use and share, and it's a more green approach to how you would use a building. And I think it's an exciting opportunity for us. I think the background they have in that they have lots of experience with sharing with churches really starts it off on the right foot. They're very used to what church needs are. I think the fact that that they're looking to, you know, try it out with a 1-year lease gives us an opportunity to practice sharing our space and seeing what works well and what we might want to do a little differently so that we can live this value of not having a building just sit empty all the time. So.
When we first started going to the church, we shared it with a preschool program. I can't quite remember the details, and I think that worked out really well. I'm really excited about this. I think it would be cool. I just want to start over as a kindergartner because that International Baccalaureate program sounds fabulous.
It really is. Yeah.
So we shared our space with a cooperative nursery school, which
Parent.
I'm sorry, Julie.
Play Center.
Rochester Play Center.
Rochester Play Center, and I think that was a great use of our space, and it actually drew in a lot of families. But that was a different sort of operation. That was a shoestring operation, if you will. And I think Rasa is on a much more professional footing, which I think we all can appreciate from a lot of what Amy had mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's great that they're gonna, you know, would be responsible for cleaning every day. I mean, that's very different than the Play Center where we clean, but you know, We tried. We tried. Well, I mean, we got more than, it was just the church people actually, but still. But I know when we were, there was a preschool in Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Mount Kisco that for the year and a half we were out there. And I know that did not, go well. And the preschool, was claiming the space and telling us what to do in the church. And it was, so it isn't always, but, I think again, with the history of Rasa being at other places, that's a good recommendation.
Are there any others that have questions or concerns that you'd like to share, and that, then when the board is discussing it next week, we can make sure and bring those forward along with what has already been asked or shared here at the forum? Well, it sounds great. And if you do, email Amy or myself or Luke, sometimes things or questions come up later. I really appreciate everybody's coming out to listen and learn more about this tonight. I'm excited about the opportunity. Katzman's, how old are your grandkids? I can't remember.
They are 9 and almost 6.
So
They've
your
been-
9-year-old
they've-
would,
He
your
would- he would
9-year-old
still
would be here?
No, he would be down.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would.
Yeah,
They've been involved for 4 years.
okay.
Yeah.
Sarah, I see your comment, and I think I agree. And so we will ask Amy to just check in down there and see what the feedback from the Congregational Church is, just to be able to make sure we've covered that base. I appreciate that comment.
I just want to say thank you to Amy and Kim, the amount of information they've gathered and negotiated in the conversations. Just an immense amount of details, just even to this point, knowing there's a lot more to come to figure it out. Thank you for that work. So I appreciate that. I will say, when we talked about it as staff, I think, there was a lot of, how are we going to do this? And where's this going to go? And they better not put desks in the chapel. Maybe a minister said that, and, things like that. But Darren, we're worried, like, well, how does he think? He has to kind of care for the property and the building. And his immediate response was, this would just fill this place with life all week when it's normally so quiet. I don't know what he means to say about his staff colleagues with that comment, but but I think that's true. So whatever possibility and however it works out, it's a good thing for us to consider. And it's good learning for us as we think about our space, whether we're here and whatever the future is for our space, learning through this process as well. So thank you, Kim. Thank you all. Again, continue to send in any questions our way, or comments for the board as well, to Kim, Amy, or myself, or Anne. Thanks, everyone.